Now is our friend David Weinstein, who's a partner at Hinshaw and Culbertson. He's also a former assistant U.S. attorney, and we'd love to talk to you about stuff like this. So thanks very much for coming in. Let's talk about Judge Kavanaugh, because I know that you're saying that he might not be as conservative as people are saying that he is. Why?
Well, when you look at the candidate, we all knew they were going to pick somebody who was from the right side of the aisle. And given the opinions that he's written and the positions he's taken in most of these opinions, he's a conservative. But he isn't somebody who likes to legislate from the bench. He's a person who believes, like Scalia did, in textualism and originalism, which means you look at the statute, you look at the document, you don't put your own personal belief into it, you look at the words that are on the page to see what they say. So the conservatives like him, there's no question about it. But is he going to be as far to the right as everybody is portraying him to be, or could he be a little bit closer to the center? Look who he clerked for.
Justice Kennedy.
Yeah,
exactly.
Not considered a swing vote, even though he didn't want to be considered a swing vote. You talked about those past opinions written by Kavanaugh. We just heard from Senator Chuck Schumer. He was saying basically we must stop this nomination, this nominee. We cannot confirm the mention of extremists and the possibility of the issues that could be brought up with women's reproductive rights. So let's talk about some of those past opinions that he's written. Anything point directly to those particular rights being in jeopardy at this point?
Well, certainly. If you look at his dissent, it wasn't the majority opinion, it was the dissent in a decision where they were deciding the rights of an incarcerated minor who was an immigrant here, an illegal immigrant, and she was desiring to have the baby terminated. And he was not in favor of allowing her to make her own independent decision. He wanted the government to be able to remove her from custody, send her to the people who were sponsoring her, and let them try to coerce her to change her mind. So what that tells me is that he's not in favor necessarily of the independent right of a woman to make this choice. So certainly on that particular issue, that's one that he's written about, and we know what he's going to say. But remember, every case is unique, and facts are what make the particular case. In that particular circumstance, he hung his hat on the facts that were connected to that case. He's a father. He has 2 daughters. Perhaps in a different factual situation, he might not come across as hardline in his approach. But certainly the people who are on the left who feel that he's going to come down on it are going to hang their hat on that and believe that that's the way he's going to decide. But he's written a number of other opinions. A lot of them were administrative opinions because that's what you do in the D.C. circuit. He doesn't always come down on the side of big government. Sometimes he comes out against the government having an overriding decision. He's sided in favor of unions. He's sided in favor, rather, against the unions. So we're going to have to wait and see if he's confirmed, if he's going to be as hard a right-wing judge as everybody's portraying him to be.
Well, here was his first chance really to introduce himself to the American people last night after President Trump named him as his nominee. Let's take a listen.
My judicial philosophy is straightforward. A judge must be independent and must interpret the law, not make the law. A judge must interpret statutes as written, and a judge must interpret the Constitution as written, informed by history and tradition and precedent.
And precedent. And that seems to be the key word, because even during his confirmation hearings when he was appointed to the federal bench by George W. Bush, he was asked about Roe v. Wade, and he said that he considered that to be a precedent, that was settled law.
Maybe not what the conservatives want to hear, but if he is going to do exactly what he just said and rely on precedent and not try to interject himself, well, the precedent's been set. There's no reason for him to overturn that precedent, and it's not going to come up to the Supreme Court in a black and white type of decision. No one is going to say, okay, now it's time to overturn Roe versus Wade. So if he's guided by precedent and he's guided by opinions that have been made going all the way back to when the people drafted the Constitution, he's not going to be so quick to overturn that. Perhaps somebody else will become the swing vote. He might move someone else off of the aisle and move them into the center.
And David, quickly, Democrats are sort of concerned, thinking that maybe this pick, the president made this pick with the Mueller probe and the Russia investigation top of mind. Why is that?
Well, all you have to do is go back to 2008 and look at a law review article that the judge wrote for the University of Minnesota Law Review based on some comments he had made. One of the biggest points he made in his article: a sitting president shouldn't be subject to a criminal or civil investigation. If I was a sitting president who was subject to a criminal investigation, I'd want somebody on the bench who was going to say, well, you shouldn't be subject to it. Now, it's not going to come directly to them that way. It'll come in the way of trying to quash a subpoena that's given to him, but we already know how Kavanaugh is going to decide on that issue, so of course that's why he's the choice of this president.
And interesting, he has the perspective of someone who worked on the Clinton investigation with Kenneth Starr when that was being prosecuted. So he saw firsthand the kind of pressure that an investigation like that could put on a sitting president. So that's what he was writing about.
Exactly. He was there. He helped to draft the 11 articles of impeachment that were brought against President Clinton. He worked with Starr. He criticized the independent prosecutor's role at that point in time in the statute that was put into effect. So he's not necessarily a big fan of the statute itself, but he's certainly been part of the process. He knows what goes on behind the scenes. And again, that's certainly something that weighed heavily in the president's decision to nominate this judge for the justice position.
David Weinstein, thank you so much for coming in. Always great to get your insight.
You're
Thanks
welcome.
so much.
Always glad to help.